Cross-disciplinary collaboration has been part of the history of ideas since the field itself took shape in the 1920s and 30s. Arthur Lovejoy, who's often seen as the founder, creator of the history of ideas, was a philosopher who taught at Johns Hopkins, but he really made a sharp distinction between history of philosophy and history of ideas, which looked at ideas and constructs not as formal philosophy, but precisely as they crossed borders from philosophy into literature, into the visual arts, or back again as those fields had an impact on philosophy. So he always saw it as a field for collaboration. He always recruited people from other disciplines into the History of Ideas Club. I think all of this will continue in interesting ways. I think that the waning of the theory years in literature departments has allowed literary scholars to come back to history in important ways, partly with a new interest in material texts as well as the words in them, but partly the new historicism. And those are approaches that are much easier to work into the history of ideas than the high theory approaches were. So I think we're going to see a lot of collaboration, and I think it's tremendously important. We've been challenged most recently by David Armitage, very brilliant Harvard historian and intellectual historian, to work across borders, both chronological and geographical, to do a kind of histories of ideas as they're transmitted around the world. And in honesty, there are very few people who are competent in German, Chinese, French, and the way we can solve that aporia is by collaboration, by recruiting people from complementary fields. So I think there's a practical place for collaboration. The range of things we will consider ideas that have an interesting history is just going to get bigger and bigger. We'll be looking at more traditions, more countries, more languages. Historians of American thought in the post-World War II period talk a lot about people they call public intellectuals. People who were not parts of, usually did not have university positions, did not have an official qualification, rarely had a PhD or formal training, but who wrote about ideas for a wide public. But in fact, the real public intellectuals in post-war America were African-American ministers. Martin Luther King is the one that people remember, but there were many others like him who were intellectuals and who were not just acting in the street, but also grappling with questions in theology and in philosophy and trying to make bridges between the two. And that's one area which I expect to see in American history of ideas be very lively in the next generation or so. History matters tremendously now precisely because it's been ejected from the group of disciplines that have a seat at council tables. In World War II, the national leaders, some of them, like Churchill, were historians, and all of them would immediately have understood why you would ask historians for advice. They all did. Roosevelt did quite regularly. Now, the disciplines that are thought relevant to making a big decision, shall we go back into Iraq in the United States right now, are present policy disciplines. You look at what political science tells you supposedly quantitatively about the possibilities. You look at economics. And that helps to explain why 11 years ago we went into Iraq thinking that Sunni and Shiite Muslims got along perfectly well and that their coexistence would not be a major problem in the new democratic Iraq. Now, any historian of Islam could have explained why that wasn't a good idea, but no historian of Islam was consulted. As Faulkner said, the past never goes away. It never dies. In fact, it's not even past. It's still there with you over and over again. You've only got to look in the Near East to see how that past sticks and makes people act in certain ways. And it is historians who have some kind of access to that.